Even in these moments of great glory in American history, it still was just as messy as it is now, and there's really no way around that. Now, what that does is it encourages us to look at history in a Christian way, recognizing that the virtue of Christian hope requires patience, and only God is capable, willing, and able to bring the world to a glorious completion and fullness as he has intended and he has promised. But when politics begins to work in absolutes, and when it's driven by religious conviction that raises it to a sacred level, all that seems to go by the wayside. And I think that's a big part of what we're dealing with. Now, on the other side, you've got a group of folks who, for them, the ideal is a world that's purged of religion completely. And so finally, in the grand scheme, progressive view of history, human beings take their rightful place. And we are the ones who were able to perfect the world by applying the right kind of ideology that we know is right and good for everybody else. And so you've got this really, in my opinion, very faulty, sloppy view of the historical process that we are part of as human creatures. And you see the fierceness in often violent ways. These things are approached and the way that they clash with each other that leads us to, what we're talking about right now.
I just can't help believe that God is in the union of us getting together because there's so many things that you both just said that I need to respond to, and I probably won't remember them all to do that because it caveats not only where we are as a country and a people, but a lot of my personal experience, and I've written a lot about it. When I had my experience with God and came into the faith for real in my life in the early 30s, I was in a Baptist church, Jerry Falwell Church, moral majority. And for whatever reason, I don't remember exactly, but I'm sure we heard a lot about anti-abortion, against abortion. And so in those days, up into the election of President Obama, the extent of my political thought was about 3 seconds. Which political party had anti-abortion in the platform? And of course, that was Republican. And that was the sole analysis of my voting in the years that I voted. I don't remember voting for Carter. I don't think I voted that year. But that was my analysis, simple as true. And I write about this. And I write about how I believe I was too busy. I was working full time. I was ministering full time. I was in graduate school, had a family. I didn't have time for stuff like that. And I believe that's where a lot of people are. They don't have time to understand the nuances of what's going on. And again, I don't want to draw this out, but it was President Obama who, and you might disagree with this, but when I heard him speak contemporaneously off the cuff about his faith, he gave a clear testimony of what Christ did in his life. To me, that spoke to me as genuine. Now, I'm not trying to, I know the affiliation he had with the pastors and that sort of thing. I know all that came out. But it made me, for the first time, listen to the man. What I heard in this politician was grace, was to have spiritual convictions, but have the grace to see different views. That had impact to me. And again, pastoring had an impact to me to hear what women went through the abortion process. So what I'm trying to say is I started viewing my political decisions with more grace, accepting good and bad positions and trying to make a good decision. And so what I think has happened is because of the evolution that we've gone through, the migration of, and what you both have described, I think the results is the dysfunction of the governance of our nation now, where we are today. Where we are today, split government has been in existence for a number of years. The bipartisanship is just so divided that Congress really can't do it. There's limited legislation done. In my opinion, President Biden was one of the most effective presidents we had simply because the legislation he got passed. Put all the political rhetoric aside, put all the the news media, the judgmentalism there is. I think as far as passing legislation, he was very effective. But now what has happened now, today? What we're witnessing, and there's something I read this morning, that this blurring or this dominance that you talked about, Mike, about decision making in faith communities towards our politics has led to as we mentioned before, a minimal emphasis on the qualifications of the individual that we're voting for, and more in support of the social issues that we want to embrace, general speaking. And now we have people in office that are not qualified to lead our country. And this is the result. We have a blurring of the constitutional boundaries. And Mike, this is where I believe is different in our point of history. I agree with you. We've had these threats and we've had these terrible, in other countries, there have been upheavals, and in our own country. But now I don't think the Constitution, maybe I'm wrong, I don't think the Constitution was ever as in much jeopardy as it is today. That we are testing the boundaries of the Constitution and its effectiveness. One, because of the ineffectiveness of the legislative branch. It's dead. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't intercede. We're back on 2/3 of our constitutional effectiveness. And then now the assaults on the judiciary are weakening the other area. So I believe we're in new times here. We're in times where I don't think our Constitution has ever been so weakly embraced or so much in threat. How do you all feel about that? Do you think we're in a safe place? Do you think our Constitution is being threatened right now because of the elected officials we have?
I mean, I think about it a lot. Our Constitution and the Republic called the United States of America, when it was founded, it was acknowledged by those people called founding fathers that for it to function properly, and they called it a grand experiment, it wasn't a monarchy.
Was it who said it? We have a republic if we can compete, if we can keep it. Who said that? Adams, I think.
I'm not sure which one it was. What they said was it required the virtue of people formed by religion. Okay, the virtue. Now, I don't buy into the theory that all of the founding fathers were Bible believing Christians, but all of them were products of what we call Christendom or a Christian culture, both in Europe, which they brought to America, and they recognized in their classical training, which was influenced by the Renaissance in the 15th, 16th, 17th centuries, that virtue and character were necessary for people to exist, right? In communities. There they followed Aristotle. I mean, just ancient ways of thinking. We are social creatures. But for us to not just get along, but function well in that we seek what is good for us and for each other requires people of virtue. Well, when you vote for someone and the only virtue you're looking at is he or she supports my burning issues, right? And you put everything else aside, and basically you get what you pay for. And that's what we have. Okay, we elect those kinds of people. And then we see again and again and again corruption or just deficiencies in their character that shows up in scandals and infractions and the way that they disregard the Constitution, even though they claim to uphold it, and that talking and actually talking and saying things and then governing in a way that's consistent with that, well, there's a very large gap. The deep cynicism that exists now, where you can't trust any politicians, right? I mean, you can't trust them because they all lie and they're all out for themselves. And you can point to too many examples that actually prove that. So then what I see in people is just the kind of weariness and fatigue in it all, and they just drop out. And then the political junkies take over, right? And for politics is their life.
I want to respond to that, but Dave, I want you to get a chance to jump in here first.
You can respond to
that. My question is, what do we do about that? How do we address that as Christians, as people of faith?
Well, okay,
Seeing,
I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna go. My turn.
okay,
Go ahead, Dave.
No, because seeing what you just put on the table, I think what I want to say is should be said before you say that, Jerry. By just making that transition in our conversation, what you all the stuff that Mike put on there about the messiness and the bipart, to me that's just politics. And I know Mike very well, and I know where he's coming from when he's saying that. Jerry, I know you well enough that I know how you filtered what Mike was saying, and I know what Mike is saying. And there's two different, you're, it's being perceived in two different ways. And I think this is a forum to be honest, because personally, and I'll speak for myself, is I disagree